Welcome to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony, the Diarrhea Dr. Maddox. That gift is for you. You should open that. It's from Sadie.
Oh, a gift from Sadie?
That's Sadie apologizing for doing
Sadie,
diarrhea.
Sadie, I appreciate so much that she did it on the wood floor.
Oh, no, it was in your house. When you said she had a couple of bouts of diarrhea overnight, I was like, that either means you had to get up and walk her in the middle of the night or something much worse.
It was both.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm glad she's feeling better. I'm just going to tear this. My mother's instinct is so deep in me to, carefully...
Is she a wrapping paper preserver?
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Is that because she's using some kind of, bougie, hand-printed wrapping paper?
No, it's much more... I don't know how she got that, Depression-era jar labeled bits of string too small to use kind of vibe. Yeah. But she does have a little bit of that. Illustrated Catalog of American Mushrooms. This is exactly the book I didn't know I need. This is beautiful.
It's a gorgeous book to put on your little coffee table.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous
Just what
book.
I need, more books. Unironically, I do need more books. What I also need is more bookshelves.
You really like books, yeah.
Thank you so much for this beautiful book.
Thanks, Sadie.
I will clean up a couple diaries for a book any day.
Oh, poor baby. We got another person in the studio today. We are joined by Adam, Mr. Lunchbox.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want your last name on the podcast, so I won't say it, but Adam, Mr. Lunchbox is here.
Johnny Lunchbox, as I've been known on the internet now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Adam is a member of our local play group. When did you start playing with us? It was it's been a year?
Almost a year to the day. It was right after last Saltbox is when I found out about you all.
Right. That's exactly what it was. And Saltbox is this upcoming weekend. So what an auspicious anniversary. Yeah, you've been playing with us for a year, and you kind of immediately jumped in and got very involved in the play group in a lot of ways, and that I think everyone really appreciates, including running your own Cube event in Baltimore for charity a couple months ago, which was why you got the name Mr. Lunchbox, or Johnny Lunchbox, or whatever it was. Is it Johnny Lunchbox? Is it not Mr. Lunchbox?
It's Johnny Lunchbox.
I made that up.
As someone on the internet's like, Johnny Lunchbox is here somewhere. I'm like, that's me. And also, that's my new name, and I love it.
There's one anecdote from Shoebox I forgot to share on the podcast that I've been meaning to share, which is that I, at some point, had this idea for the 69th draft of 100 Ornithopters to give out little, Ornithopter seats to the drafters as a thank you for being part of that, monumentous milestone draft.
Yeah.
And so I was going around to the vendors, and I was like, hey, do you have 8 copies of Ornithopter? And I was trying to get the same printing or whatever. And I went to one booth, and I said, hey, do you have 8 copies of Ornithopter? And he goes, buddy, I'm Mr. Ornithopter. And I said... I am so glad to hear you say that as someone who's been called Mr. Ornithopter.
You take off the name tag you're wearing that says Mr. Ornithopter and hand it over and say, I am done with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently this guy has a huge collection of ornithopters, considers himself one of the preeminent ornithopter collectors.
Really?
But,
considers himself one of the preeminent ornithopter collectors.
Yeah.
What a world.
But yeah, it really was what a weight off my shoulders that somebody else introduced themselves to me as Mr. Ornithopter. I was like, that feels great. I
and now
love
you
that.
get to correct everybody that calls you the ornithopter guy.
I'm not that. Actually, the ornithopter guy, vendor,
somebody else
living in St. Paul, Minneapolis. We got Adam on the show today because we're talking about a concept you introduced to the play group that I had heard of it before, but I'd never really properly done it. We'll talk about my history with this format. Why don't you explain what you proposed to the play group and that we did over the past couple weeks at Cube Night?
Yeah, so I proposed we do something called a theory draft. I've heard it called a couple of different things, cube constructed by some folks. But the basic idea is you take your theoretical best pool of cards. If you had the perfect draft, you got the exact 45 cards that you wanted. You just ahead of time, take those cards, put them together. And then you're going to build your best 40 card deck out of that with your sideboard. And you
From a cube list, to say.
From a
so
cube list,
pick a specific cube and basically say, imagine you had your magical Christmas land, all the stars aligned draft, and you got exactly the deck you wanted, and then proxy it up because obviously everyone's doing this. So there's a lot of overlap. Everyone's got the best card in the cube in their deck, theoretically. Proxy it up and then play out the matches to see how a cube basically stands up as a constructed pool, as if it was like a pool for standard or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple different ways to do it, but we did it with the regular cube, which was a ton of fun. We did it what I say is the most traditional way of just anyone can do whatever they want. You just take your favorite cards, or you try to build a meta deck, or as you said, Magic Christmas Land. But it's a lot of fun.
Anthony, I know you expressed a little bit of... Because I believe you didn't talk to Anthony about this first, because you don't need the permission of the cube designer.
We talked about it.
You did talk about it behind the scenes?
Yeah.
You seemed a little surprised when it was proposed, but maybe you were just hesitant because you felt like people were going to...
Finally, people were going to break my cube. Just like I was so scared would happen at CubeCon 1, which turned out not to be the case. But here is a much newer, clearer opportunity for everyone just to say, yeah, this is the best deck. We all know it.
Let's start there, I think. What do you think this says about a cube's design? if anything? Like, presuming that you're designing your cube to be drafted and not to be played like this. I mean, you could obviously design a cube that was specifically designed to be played like this, and that would be a different thing. But the regular cube is not designed with this in mind. It was designed to be drafted. It is drafted 99% of the time it is played. Do you think this says anything about the cube design meaningful?
Honestly, I think less so than I expected. So I was definitely a little bit concerned that we might have that situation of just like everybody showing up with the same deck. I was also interested in, would people like identify what the level 1 best deck is and then try to like metagame that and bring what they think the next level best deck, or even like go further. I was curious how far people would go. But I think what ended up happening is, well, first of all, I think this was just so much more of a difficult exercise for me as a player than I expected it to be. I do feel like the decks don't look like decks you would get in a draft for obvious reasons, and also what the best decks are just different. Like, I think it's just a different thing is kind of my takeaway, because there are some decks that I realized are often successful in a draft, but maybe that has more to do with just redundancy for certain type of effects. And what might actually be the best deck is just like, well, here's this really niche thing that's just never going to come together. But if you have Magical Christmas Land and people that are willing to like seek out those like more niche under-supported themes, then you're just going to get really different things emerge.
I was curious to see what other people would do, but let's talk about how we each approach this. I've drafted the regular cube a zillion times. Anthony's drafted it more than me, probably. How many times had you drafted the regular cube before doing this exercise?
Twice.
And there was at least one person, probably two. I imagine Tom has not drafted the regular cube either.
I think that's right.
I know Derek hadn't. So there's at least two people in this exercise that had never played this cube before. So they were looking at the list and trying to figure out from first principles what might be good. Like, do you think it's maybe in some circumstances actually kind of a weakness to have played the cube before, because maybe your perceptions are colored by what works in draft, which is different than what works in this weird constructed format?
Yeah, honestly, I think so. And then I think there's the next level of sort of bad habits, which is being the cube designer, where I'm not only just saying, what have I seen be successful in drafts before, but I'm also seeing, what are the things that I've planted in here that I think are supposed to work, that in a draft I'm smart enough to eat my vegetables, but now I'm just like, well, we got to put Feld into the third path in my deck because this is what it's here for.
Now, it's definitely a different world being the designer and knowing all the cards and understanding like why you put them in there and the dreams that you had for them.
Right. But I think that like mixed level of experience was valuable. And the other thing that I would take away from that is it definitely didn't feel as much like, oh, we're solving the cube. Like, people were still coming with their own proclivities and tastes and interests and biases. So it just felt a lot more sort of like natural and organic in terms of like what the collection of decks looked like than I expected.
Let's start with you, Adam.
Sure.
As the person who had drafted the cube the least, had the least experience with the environment, how did you decide what to build?
I think there's a couple of different ways that people can go about it. And you talked about if you want to try and identify what the best deck is and bring some version of that, or if you want to try and identify that deck and then bring the deck that beats that one. The option that I enjoy the most, and I know that a few people landed on, was build the deck that you think you're going to have the most fun with. For me, that was a heroic list, specifically red-white heroic. It was a format like the original Theros block. I was getting back into Magic a bit more. I never got to draft or play with a heroic deck, and so I was finally like, ooh, this is my chance to build this out and see how it goes. And it was actually fascinating doing that because it was not the deck that I thought it was going to be. Traditional red-white, in my mind, I'm like, turn little dude sideways, attack for a lot of damage. And this played out much more like a combo deck where sequencing really mattered. There were a lot of tight decision-making choices that had to happen for it to play out correctly. I had some really big combo turns, some other games that played really slowly, and it was just, it was fascinating and a much different experience than I expected.
I'll parlay that into what I did, because I also built a red-white heroic deck, but I came in week one, and again, we did this 2 weeks back-to-back, and I built two different decks for each week, but week one, I came in just saying, I'm going to try to make the best deck I possibly can. With regards to the metagaming thing, I was certainly not confident enough in other people's perceptions of the best deck to try and play what I thought was an answer to the best deck. Like, I saw myself in a world where, like, I do think the red-white heroic deck is the best deck in the cube under these circumstances. And frankly, honestly, when drafted too, if you get a little lucky or you know what you're doing, I saw a world where I think it's the best deck in the cube. I therefore draft, a deck that can beat it, because the heroic deck is comparatively fragile. Like, you have specific sequences of cards that can be broken apart by instant speed interaction. And the deck I brought the second week very much was kind of designed to destroy red, white, heroic. It's very possible, but I was not confident enough that everyone would share my perceptions of the environment to like do that. And then I would just show up with a worse deck and people would be playing whatever they wanted. And I'd be like, I wish I had red, white, heroic right now, because I do think it's the best deck in the cube.
I think that difference of it played so much more like a combo deck, I definitely saw that play out in games, both games that I played against people, because somebody else also, I think there were at least 3 red-white heroic decks.
Yeah, there were 3 the first week.
And it did feel so much more like a combo deck where it's like, I'm at 16, can I attack you now? I don't know. Like, you legitimately are just going to stack up 3 combat tricks and kill me next turn.
Or 1 combat trick on an Illuminator Virtuoso.
Sure.
That's all you need.
Turns out that card is pretty good. And I think another way to think about that is I just saw so many cards get played that I feel like I almost never see get played in draft. And I think Illuminator Virtuo is kind of like in that in-between where it gets played occasionally, but...
It always gets played, I think.
Maybe I'm a little bit under on that, but like Favored Hoplite and Fairy Guidemother or things like that are just like, this is clearly a plant for the heroic deck. It's trying to send a signal. I think people pick up on that signal, but then don't actually play that specific card because it just looks so... Like, at the end of the day, you're like, well, the floor on this is too low and I don't have enough support to reach the really high ceiling it can have. And when you're just able to build your Magical Christmas Land deck, it absolutely makes sense and absolutely plays.
Let's do a deep dive on this deck, I think, because it was, I think, foundational to certainly week 1 of this sort of metagame. The things that drew me to this deck were, first and foremost, the like power outliers that I think honestly are at their best in this cube, even relative to like some of the most powerful cube environments. And we've actually talked about this ages ago on the show with regards to Dreadhorde Arcanist or Arcanist, because that's a card that is banned in Legacy that I play in the Bun Magic cube. That is a very strong card there. And undeniably, in this cube, you are able to have much more powerful turns with that card because the Bun Magic cube does not have combat tricks that give +3 power, then they allow you to flash back your heroic reinforcements with Dreadhorde Arcanist. So
this is Dreadhorde Arcanist as Richard Garfield intended. Yeah. Like, give this thing a bunch of power so you can recast your 3-mana pump spell is kind of a thing you can do here.
I look at a card like Dreadhorde Arcanist and I'm like, this is the best card in the cube in the right deck, and obviously I have the full power to build the right deck, so I'm going to do that. I also think that Illuminator Virtuoso is right up there, with the caveat that it's a lot more fragile. 1 toughness on it means that you have to be a lot more careful about how you use it, but I intentionally included a number of haste enablers in my deck so that, like, my opponent could wipe the board or whatever, and I could just go, okay, well, Illuminator Virtuoso, Reckless Charge, you're dead. You know, like, that'll just kill somebody pretty quick. Those 2 threats really pulled me in. I do think Annex and Siamede is good here, though honestly, I was on the cusp about it making my main deck. I think the baseline stats are quite good of just having First Strike and Vigilance. I should say, we have a cards mention page for this podcast, and in this episode especially, we're going to put all of our deck lists in there. So the cards will not be in order, but you'll see our deck lists, and obviously every card we talk about is going to be in those deck lists, so you can go and see what we're talking about here. And you and I had a very different take on the red-white heroic deck because I think our foundation was the same. Other cards that really pulled me into this deck were, I think Fist of Flame is incredible. I think that card on base rate is very good here, and when you have anything you're triggering by targeting, then it gets kind of nuts. And the trample is especially important for combat tricks because you want to be able to trample over blockers.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, especially in my first deck where I was hoping to, like, my plan against this deck was have lots of little tokens, and the trample on Annex and Siamede and a couple other cards, that just, like, completely hosed my entire plan.
Honestly, the linchpin, I think, of this deck for me, maybe unexpectedly, is Reckless Rage. I think Reckless Rage, which is 1-mana instant, 4 damage to a creature an opponent controls, 2 damage to a creature you control. I think that's quietly maybe one of the best removal spells in the entire cube, and I build a deck where I can very freely, you know, use it at very little cost to me. You know, even little stuff like Favorite Hoplite and Monastery Swift Spear does not die to the 2 damage because you either have a Prowess trigger or you have the Heroic trigger. And then obviously Dreadhorde Arcanist, nuts with Reckless Rage because you get to cast it targeting the Arcanist, and then you can attack. And the second one you don't want to target the Arcanist with because it does have 2 damage on it. So the second one you got to point at something else if you want to keep your Arcanist, but you're not going to have any blockers in your way after you deal 4 damage to 2 creatures for 1 mana on your turn. So that card was like the linchpin for me where I was like, yeah, I think this deck kind of has it all. And
I mean, that's also super fun for me to hear because it is this like removal spell that sometimes it's just a bone shards, but it also is like this key part of a heroic deck that I think a lot of people slept on for a long time. And so
yeah, I slept on it. I didn't put it in my deck, and I saw you cast it. I was like, ooh, a lot of regret in my heart.
Yeah, I think that card is really nuts. And that's a great example of a card that like I would be very likely to look over if I had not already played that card in this cube, thought about it in this cube, because it's not a card you see in a lot of cube lists, but I do think here it's quite strong. Now, on that foundation of like basic heroic stuff, I included those cards, some of the other really good combat tricks, your shelters, your reckless charges, you know, Blazing Crescendo I think is one of the low-key, quiet, best combat tricks here as like a second Fist of Flame, and then it also cantrips.
Right, and I think an important part about all of those combat tricks is they also are they replace themselves.
That was important for me. I did not end up playing Expedite or Crimson Wisps. I was on the fence, but they didn't make my final list. And the reason they didn't is because on this foundation of like the best sort of core heroic deck, I wanted to also go a little bit bigger and have a little bit better late game and not just commit all into being aggressive. And so I kind of complemented that with my baby Young Pyromancer, which I think is not normally at its best in a red-white deck, but in a red-white deck that has specifically gone hard on playing a bunch of instants and sorceries and a bunch of cantripping instants and sorceries like we just talked about. I think it's quite good.
And you have ways with like Phalanx Leader and Heroic Reinforcements to close a game with a bunch of tokens.
Right, yeah, way to benefit from all those tokens. It's also another great way, like Reckless Charge, great with... Reckless Rage, great with Young Pyromancer because you can just kill off a token. Now, not the one you got for casting it, obviously, because you have to have targets to put it on the stack, but assuming you've already cast one other spell before it, then, it's easy thing to sacrifice to deal 4 damage to your opponent's creature. I complemented that with, Young Pyromancer, Clarion Spirit, and Grim Lavamancer and Dragon's Rage Channeler. All of those cards I feel like are not really heroic cards, but I think complement the package of the heroic cards really nicely and allow you to also have like a little bit of a different game plan that means you can also just kind of grind in a longer game if you need to. In hindsight, I don't know if that's necessary because as we've mentioned already, this deck can be so explosive that I think maybe your mid-game plan is just, wait till they tap out and I have a Virtuoso and Reckless Charge and one other combat trick and it does not matter what their board is.
Yeah.
You're either going to Plague Wind them or you're going to win the game. Maybe that's what your mid-game strategy should be, but I felt this deck worked quite well. I did make a couple of swaps between weeks, a couple of things that I saw in other people's decks that I really liked. I was originally on Arc Lightning, which is a card I'm just really high on here. I think 3 damage divided is just a really great base rate. And then obviously with Arc Lightning, you can also point, one of those damage at your different heroic creatures to trigger heroic, ideally multiple times. Point one at a favorite Hoplite, one at a Phalanx Leader, you get, a bunch of heroic triggers go crazy. But a card I really wish I had that was in your deck was Lava Dart. I underrated Lava Dart, I think possibly because I was, again, maybe not expecting a bunch of red-white heroic mirrors, but It's really good in the mirror, obviously, and the fact that can also double-trigger heroic in certain circumstances when you can afford to have the 2 damage on your creature is huge, and I just wanted cheaper spells. The second game I lost against you, you played a turn 3 Phalanx Leader. I had both Arc Lightning and Volt Charge in my hand, and I pointed Arc Lightning at it, and you had the Emerge Unscathed, and I was like, well, that's just game, because now that has 3 toughness, now the Volt Charge is not going to kill it, and if I had just had Lava Dart, obviously that's a dumb thing to, if you just had that card in this one exact scenario, but anyway, I really wanted the cheap spells because I had a couple times where I was stuck with like 2-3 mana spells in hand, and I was like, as cool as it is to flashback Volt Charge or Arc Lightning with Dreadhorde Arcanist, which this deck can do, I just really wanted the Lava Dart in the second week. Other small change, I didn't have Bomat Courier in this list initially, which...
Really?
Yeah, I was kind of like, I don't know, it seems like more like an aggro card, and I underrated how much once your opponent knows you have combat tricks, they just can't really ever block Bomat Courier unless they're willing to lose whatever they're blocking it with, which does make it a lot better.
Yeah, I don't know, but then you're still trading card for card, and if my opponent is using their combat tricks to save their Bomat Courier, not killing me with Illuminator Virtuoso,
but it's Bomat Courier, you're not going card for card because you'll eventually get a card off of the attack.
Back.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, the potential card draw off of it, I think, is what pushes it over the edge in this deck.
Well, the tiny thing that pushed over the edge for me was the additional card type for Delirium on Dragon's Rage Channeler, which this deck can get to Delirium without it because it does have instant sorceries, creatures, and lands, but the addition of Artifact made that a lot easier to basically get to. So yeah, that was my deck. I didn't have to play against a control deck. There's only one control deck, really, that showed up to the pool, and I didn't get a chance to play against it. I did come, packing Shelters and Emerged Unscathes and Haste Enablers, which I do think give me a lot of game against the control deck. I had a couple cards in my sideboard, too, I think would help there.
Right, yeah, which, to be clear, we built a pool of a full 45 cards, as if you'd had your dream draft, which meant you were also building your dream sideboard.
Somewhere along the line, I messed that up and thought it was a 40-card pool, so I was 5 cards short on all my sideboards, which...
You've been thinking about weird deck numbers for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought that. But yeah, I still think this is the best, level 1 deck in the cube. We could obviously have a complicated metagame discussion about like, okay, if we were actually doing this every single week and we started a little league, can this deck still be tier 1 when people are playing around it and expecting it? And I'm not sure, but I do think it has at its sort of base rate all the tools to beat most decks in this environment unless they are specifically tailored to take it apart. And even then, it's like the right draw with this deck is just the best thing you can do in this cube. Like Dreadhorde Arcanist and a Illuminator Virtuoso with a couple combat tricks and a Shelter and Emerge Unscathed, like that sequence, like almost no deck is going to beat if you play it right.
That's true. I did see some matchups against specifically Esper control decks, which was another type of theme that I saw a couple people bring in the second week. And like especially Reflector Mage and Unsummons and Baleful Strix, if you don't have Trample, is like really, really potent against this deck. So that's another sort of big takeaway is I did see some of the sort of like rock, paper, scissor effect that ideally you kind of like associate with a healthy metagame in Magic. Yeah. And that was pretty exciting to see.
Yeah, it was interesting. And this really does strike me as the kind of coin toss deck of, I think, in terms of thinking about a of meta. This is the one where if things go right, you're likely going to win. But bringing it back in week 2, I did go up against more decks that were tooled to beat this and to disrupt it. And I thought that was really fun. When I played this, most of my matches also went to 3 games. And I also really enjoyed that. I'm not sure if either of you had that same experience, but a lot of the matches that I saw, or the ones that were next to me, were going to game 3, which I thought was just really enjoyable, that people were building competitive decks. No one was getting absolutely blown out.
Well, I think across both weeks, I went 4-1 with this deck and only went to game 3 in the match I lost to you in the mirror match.
Oh, really?
So a data point.
Yeah, my loss in week 1 with this was against the control deck, and they were very grindy. And I think the game 3, I lost with my opponent at 1 life, and I was just staring at your Grim Lavamancer, being like, "Why didn't I put this in my deck? Any amount of reach right
or
now,
or Lava Dart."
Yeah,
you're much more aggressive. I think maybe more like textbook build of like a heroic deck is what I felt like you had. That sounds like it's derogatory in some way. I'm not thinking I'm like big brain
no,
and
books
solved
are cool,
it.
Actually,
books are cool. We like learning.
I think you like committed to the bit a little harder, where I kind of hedged and was like, okay, well, I'm going to have this like core of these powerful, synergistic cards, but I can also just play like a Fair Young Pyromancer, Clarion Spirit game if I need to. You were like, nope, I'm going to kill you fast. I've got as many of the 1-drops as are reasonable to play. I'm deeper on the combat tricks and just going to kind of go all in. I would love to play like more matches of our matchup, because I hope in the long run, like on paper, in theory, I think I'm maybe a little bit advantaged in that matchup because of my like higher density of removal. But I mean, again, like the 2 games I lost, one was a turn 3 Phalanx Leader, which you had Emerge Unscathed to protect, and then none of my removal spells worked anymore, and I just couldn't race it. And then the other game was one where you were on the play, you played a turn 2 Illuminator Virtuoso, my removal spell again cost 3 mana, so I couldn't remove it till next turn, and I took 12 on the next turn. And it was like, all right, well, now it's gone, but I am at 8. And so that game was like, would have been really close. I'm not sure how it would have gone, except I started essentially at 8 because of like a 1 turn where I didn't have my removal spell, which again, that's what the deck is designed to do. I mean, this deck's just really good, I think, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, deck's good. I think for what it's worth, in a vacuum, your deck feels stronger overall. I think that this was variance of like, I just happened to win these games, but I think if we played 100 matches, yours would come out more on top, because mine was more of the like 15 lands, all in aggressive. Like my 3-drops, they tended to be too expensive for what my deck wanted to do. Like Annex and Sidemead, I thought that was a really interesting, because that seems like the good archetype. This is the heroic card for your heroic deck, and I rarely wanted to cast it in this deck.
Interesting.
It was going so much faster than that.
That's kind of how I felt about the card too. I was like, this says heroic on the tin, but like it's not as good as Illuminator Virtuoso and Dreadhorde Arcanist, which are like actually the best cards in the deck, I think.
Yeah, the explosiveness is much lower.
It's funny to me how much I think Annex and Sidemead is kind of better in a worse version of this deck that's a little bit slower, because it can also just play more mid-range. Like the first strike makes it a great blocker if your opponent just happens to be going like slightly bigger or the same size as you.
I do think 3 mana, 2 toughness is a tough spot to be in this cube, because you do have a lot of toughness base removal. I mean, that's going to die to a lot of 1 and 2 mana removal spells, and you're going to trade down on mana. Again, compared to like the 1/3 on Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is like, not only is this 1 mana cheaper, but it's like, significantly harder to kill. I'm sorry, I feel like I interrupted you.
No, is it?
Well, I was going to say one thing about this as well. Going back to your first question of, do you think this says anything about the cube? One thing I found, because I probably tooled around with like 10 different deck ideas over the course of the 2 weeks, but when I was first pulling cards over for this, I think I was able to pull over 65 cards into my list that I would be happy to have in a heroic deck. And that's a really compelling number for me, because that means that when heroic does show up in a draft setting, there are many different versions, whether it is something that is really all in combo focused, yours that has a lot more reach, interaction, removal. Max had a different build of it as well. I think the fact that you can do that means like, oh, this is a really well supported and interesting deck that has variations where it's not going to show up exactly the same when you draft it. And
right, there were pretty significant differences between the decks, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Anthony, what did you bring week 1?
All right.
And how'd you think about it? Like, what was your goal? Was your goal? Was your goal like, I want to win, I'm going to bring what I think is the best deck, or was your goal like, I'm going to do something I think is fun? Like, how'd you approach this?
So my goal was definitely, I want to try and build the best deck and win. Is that the truth? Am I being honest with myself and with you? I don't know. I think my thinking was initially, like, I think red is the best color. It just has like the best, most efficient removal. I probably want to be there. And I also think specifically like the zombie package is kind of one of those little themes that we've talked about where when it comes together, it's really, really strong. And like facing a deck where somebody's like, I've got Crypt Breaker, and then I'm going to cast this Gravecrawler, and then I've got Carrion Feeder, and I'm just going to start drawing cards and making this huge zombie. It just feels so unbeatable, but it doesn't always come together because some of those cards fit into other decks. So I thought that just leaning into that would be the best strategy. My first build, also, there are a couple red-black zombies. I forget the name of the one with haste. Oh no, it's right here. The Dreadhorde Butcher and Dreadhorde Arcanist is also a zombie.
Really?
So my initial layout was, okay, let's just go hard on zombies, best removal, and so I also had some of those kind of supporting cards that you're talking about with things like Dragon's Rage Channeler and trying to do a little bit of a spells matter theme at the same time. And then I spent a while just looking at that list, which might have been better, and was like, you know what, I just want to lean harder into the zombies, harder into sort of like the aristocrats themes. So I cut a bunch of that spell stuff, still kept some of the good removal, but definitely like Skin Render. I'm like, this is the kind of removal spell I want because it's also a zombie. So leaning harder into that, I put in Sling Gang Lieutenant, decided to splash white for Corpse Knight and Cruel Celebrant, and then also things like Mog War Marshal. And yes, I talked myself into a Feldon of the Third Path thinking, this is my late game. I just want to keep like making a bunch of tokens with my Sling Gang Lieutenant, and sure, I might not have as much removal, but I still have some removal for the big things, and I'm going to be making tons of tokens to be able to block with, so I'm going to be able to get to that late game where I can really execute on that plan. And why not a Graceful Restoration as a sort of plan B if somebody kills my sort of engine that I'm putting together?
Graceful Restoration is a card I thought about a lot when I was...
It's a hell of a card.
It's a really fun card.
It turns out like the deck just didn't play as... I think I went 2-2 with this the first week, and it just seemed to struggle. I did a ton of damage to myself with my own mana base, and I think that maybe this is just like a big hole in my Magic playing, is I've like basically never played any constructed.
Yeah, same.
So this was like such a surprisingly overwhelming experience just to be like, what is the actual mana base? I'm like, I love Rakdos Carnarium. Am I going to put Rakdos Carnarium in here? I've spent so much of my life just thinking, whenever you get past a Rakdos Carnarium and you're playing black-red, put it in your deck. And I wonder how much my heuristic for so much of my cube experience has just been play all the removal you can get. And like, you can't really overdo it that much in most of the cubes that I play, or like I'm always balancing between do I have enough removal versus here's a threat, and then faced with the challenge of just what's the ideal balance of mana fixing, and similar, like what is the actual ideal balance of removal? These are just not questions I'm used to answering all at once. So yeah, the short of it is I feel like my deck did okay, I won a couple matches, but also it felt like often the cards just didn't come out in the right order, I didn't have the removal spell I needed, I didn't have the engine pieces I needed, and I hurt myself with my mana base so much.
Yeah, there were like maybe 3.5 themes I thought about as things I thought would be quite a bit better than in regular draft in this format. Like, noticeably, significantly stronger. One was obviously heroic. Mm-hmm. Another one was zombies. I was like, this is a great... And also, this cube is bigger than 360. So, like, I mean, you're only opening...
That's a great point.
You're opening 2/3 of a zombie package in a given draft. And so it's like, here, when you have, what is it, maybe 4 cards that care about the zombie creature type and, like, another 10 or whatever zombies that are just like randomly throughout the cube. Normally, you're never going to get all those in one deck. And so I was like, all right, if you could put them all in one deck, that's another option. Another package like that to me is the colorless artifact creature package with Steel Overseer and Sphinx Summoner and a couple other things that Psy and other things that care about like artifacts and colorless creatures. And I definitely looked at all 3 of those and was like, the artifact one and the zombie one just felt like the ceiling was not as high. It's still a lot better, obviously, to get all these pieces, but it's like this incremental better where it's like, all right, well, now you're like just a little more consistent or whatever, but you don't have the haha, you took 14 in one turn on turn 3 kind of moments you can have with the heroic deck.
Funny, I feel like another key card that I was building around was Blood Artist, and I've absolutely seen Blood Artist decks just be like, I have 8 tokens. I'm going to attack you. You will die no matter what. And it's like, I thought I was going to be able to navigate into more situations like that with this deck. Blood Artist did not stay in the battlefield very often, turns out.
I do wonder how much higher the average amount of removal is in decks when they are constructed versus drafted from the cube, because obviously you include a certain amount of removal, which dictates roughly how much removal you want to be present at the table, and we get to ignore that and each play whatever amount we think is individually correct, which means that maybe on average there was a lot more removal in these decks than there is in the average deck of this cube.
It's funny, this experience felt a little bit on sort of a spectrum with Rotisserie Draft, where Rotisserie Draft does have that feature that you mentioned of we're playing with a bigger card pool. Like, you could just have a higher ceiling on your deck because there are more cards here available.
Well, same card pool, but you are getting full selection when you make a pick.
That's what I mean. It's the same pool of cards you're picking from. It's not limited by that extra randomness of, oh, Crypt Breaker just wasn't in this draft. And in some ways, it's like if you were playing Rotisserie Draft and everybody just like got in their lane and played nice, you could kind of have this, like everybody's got their ideal deck, but there are still effects like removal and mana fixing thing that everybody is fighting for. So there still is that like little bit of clamp on some of those effects, whereas you might actually in a rotisserie draft just like get the full suite of zombies that you want. Dreadhorde Arcanist not included.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big distinctions between this and rotisserie, in talking about the removal specifically, is that everyone gets access to premium removal. Whatever you determine that removal is, you get guaranteed to that. So if you have 15 black removal spells, you're not necessarily going to need all of them for your deck. So you just get to pick the ones that you think are going to be best in this scenario. So I think the removal also just on average is much more potent, and that's something good to keep in mind.
That was a fun thing for me to do, was be like, all right, well, I know I want 7 removal spells in this deck. Now, what are the 7? And it's like having a range of answers for like, well, I want efficient stuff for things so I can clear blockers and like, play tempo positive. But I also want some things that can answer big stuff because I don't want to just lose if my opponent resolves a Archfiend of Ifnir or whatever.
Name a big creature. You can't. There aren't very many here.
Yeah. Also, I'm sitting here and I just non sequitur, but I did go to 3 games against Tom. I don't want to steal Valor against Tom. I said I thought I didn't go to the 3rd game, but I did.
Thank you for catching that because we would have gotten some angry letters
from Tom.
Only Tom would have known. No, Tom's red-green aggro deck had a crazy explosive game against me. That was actually the game where I was like, I must have Bomat Courier, because it was like, he played a Bomat Courier on turn 1. I had like heroic creatures that I was like, I'm not going to block. You're attacking, like I can't afford to block. And then it was like turn 3, he had 3 or 4 cards in hand and attack with Bomat Courier, and I was like, all right, I'll block now, and if you really want to discard 3 cards to draw the 3 cards under it, you can. And then in instant speed, he spent all 3 cards, which were all combat tricks, and then sacrificed the Bomat Courier and drew 3 cards for nothing, and I was like, I'm putting that card in my deck.
Giant Growth, another card that people don't play very often.
It made me so
that
happy
made
to
a couple
see
of
him running
appearances.
Giant Growth. Yeah.
I want to talk about the mana because I'm now going to cite this as one of my preeminent examples of why putting more fixing in a cube does not inherently make many color good stuff decks better, because I had access to
It's a pretty compelling case you're about to make.
I mean, I had access to any land I wanted to perfect mana.
Including 8 copies of Prismatic Vista if you want them, and 4 copies of Ash Barrens, because that's what's in the cube. We break singleton lands here in Baltimore.
We do.
Another very interesting decision of how many Prismatic Vistas to run, but in both my decks, I thought about it and was like, I could play a 3rd color for as free as these lands will allow, and I, in both cases, decided it was not worth it, because yes, you get a little bit better card quality if you can play, a 3rd color, basically, but I did not feel the increase in card quality was worth the additional variance, because a 3-color mana base is always worse than a 2-color mana base in these situations. I mean, don't get at me in the comments and be like, every single land is a tri-land. Like, okay, sure, you can theory craft a 3-color mana base, which is not worse, but in practice, your 3-color mana base is always worse than your 2-color mana base. It's going to be a little higher variance, and there are downsides to fixing lands. You're not playing original duels. Now, if you were, that would be a different question, but like that's what we talk about all the time. Everyone always thinks it matters how many lands are in your queue, but I don't think it does. It matters what kinds of lands they are.
Yeah, and
if you were on fetch lands and triomes and original duels, like, sure, yeah, I think 5-color decks would be the best thing to be doing here with nothing else changed, but you're not, and so as a result, I felt very strongly that both my decks should just be 2 colors, and I would play a 3rd if I was a control deck, probably, because in that case, I'm going a little slower, and having a suite of answers for what my opponent is doing is probably worth the additional color, but I could not imagine a world where I was going to play 4 colors in this format, and certainly not 5. And I think 2 is going to be correct for most decks. I think it's like a perfect example of why you can have access to as much fixing as you want, and that does not make 5-color good stuff decks inherently the best thing to be doing.
Right. I do wonder if there is a little bit of a, maybe not a perfect solution, but a much better strategy than I was able to come up quickly, because, I mean, maybe you do just play 6 Prismatic Vistas and a bunch of basics, but you still do have
bad mana base.
You do still have pretty big limitations on what you can cast then. Like, if you want to cast Phalanx Leader, you're not doing that. If I want to cast Relentless Dead, which I really did with this deck, you're not doing that with just a bunch of basics and Prismatic Vista.
Or even just, cards in 2 different colors in, like, a certain combination across turns. Like, multi-spelling is really hard when you have a mana base like that. Like, a mana base might look good on paper, but it's just not a very good mana base.
As a person who attempted to have a really aggressive mana base in the other deck that I built, I can confirm it's rough to do that. As I cracked a Prismatic Vista and failed to find my last basic.
Oh no!
Because it was already gone, and just staring at my Newscraft mob in my hand.
That was also a situation I got myself into in some matches where I'm just like, I would like to keep this up for a landfall trigger, but I cannot afford to draw my last basic, so I'm going to crack this right now. And like, that's not where I want to be. That's not fun magic.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. I can say from the other side of this, having done this with different cubes than this, specifically we've done this a lot with my Super Magic Fun Time, which is the legacy minus cube that I curate.
Your Eternal Cube.
My Eternal Cube, yes.
I'm pushing that language so hard.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant to say Super Magic Fun Time's my Eternal Cube. TM. Yeah, with that one, we do have access to the duels. And I think it is the fact that you can have fetchable duels makes going multicolor so much more appealing in that. And we have seen really successful versions of 5-color good stuff. Would you like to hear anecdotally about a couple other ways that we can do these types of drafts?
Sure.
The reasons why I've enjoyed it, and my playgroup has done it for a while, there's a couple. I think for people out there who are listening, if you have a small, consistent playgroup, if you have 8 people that are the only ones you draft with, and you say, hey, here's the cube, go ahead, build whatever deck you want to do the most, it's going to tell you a lot about what your drafters actually enjoy. It helped me identify and diagnose a problem with my group for a while.
And did you kick that person out of the group?
I like that it was a problem with your group.
It was, yes. Well, the problem was that we had a bunch of newer players who really disliked drafting blue. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, when we drafted this cube, the finals normally consisted of one person who drafted an incredible blue deck. And
okay, I was making a joke, but it's a person.
Yeah, and it was about, I think maybe 5 people would not touch blue. And then the 3 people who were more experienced would identify that it was always open, take it, and have an incredibly bonkers deck. Doing this really identified that where basically no one wanted to show up with a blue deck. And so we got to talk about it and say, hey, what's happened? Actually, the infusion of my friends from the Baltimore extended group that I've gotten from going to Tuesdays has really helped round out the blue drafters, which has made me incredibly happy.
So that was your solution for the problem, just make more friends?
Just make more friends. Just be aggressively friendly to everyone. Ask if they play Magic. If they don't, ask if they want to learn Magic.
Have you considered being controllingly friendly?
Not yet, but
mid-rangingly friendly?
I don't know. Combo friendly seems more interesting.
There are many
after
kinds
this.
of friendships.
Yeah. But I think that was a compelling and interesting conversation to talk about different folks' preferences. The other thing, if you are listening to this and you are a cube designer and you're like, oh, this is interesting, I don't know if I want to try it. The other variation on this that we've had a lot of fun with is if you specifically run a cube that has specific archetypes. If you're designing, hey, these are the 10 lanes I want drafters to wind up in, you can assign roles. Say, hey, I want you to draft the best Reanimator deck you can, and I want you to draft the best Spellslinger deck that you can. And then have a theory draft that is just the ideal versions of the decks that you want to see perform in the cube. And that's another really great way of diagnosing what is working, what is not working. What, if you talk to people afterwards, they say, yeah, I had 60 options for cards I could put in this deck. And then you talk to someone else and they say, oh, I only had 25 cards that really could work in this deck. And it felt a little bit shallow. That can help give you some more feedback. The last way we've done it was, I think we had, 25 players. We assigned colors the first time. We gave everyone access to a guild of their choice, or we assigned guilds, I should say. Everyone got one of the specific ones. That was a lot of fun, just seeing those matchups against each other. It was really flavorful. We asked people to show up wearing colors from their specific guild as well, and made a big thematic day out of it. And then we did a bigger version that was all of the 2-color combinations, all of the 3-color combinations, all of the mono decks, and one 5-color deck. And it brought me so much joy that after 5 rounds of games, the finals was 5-color Niv Mizzet versus mono red. It just felt perfect. Yeah.
That kind of touches on how I've actually done this before, which the only circumstances where I've actually done this before was years ago, the middle of COVID, when I was designing my Degenerate Microcube, which is a 15-card deck format. I had a very active group of friends online that were all very invested in the cube. We were talking about it all the time, and we would, draft and then play matches on Cockatrice. And there were a lot of times in those days where it was like, look, just build the best version of this deck that you think, can hang, and let's just run it against a deck that someone actually drafted. Because there was a lot of suggestion of what about this archetype? And I'm like, I just don't think that can, even under the best circumstances, hang with an average deck. And there, with the decks being so small and so consistent, it was pretty easy to build the best version, test it, and be like, oh yeah, actually having these 4 cards against those 2 cards you have is kind of like a non-starter. But I do wonder how useful that actually is, because to your point, the amount of redundancy you had when you were building the deck isn't necessarily apparent from looking at the records or the actual deck lists themselves. And constructing a deck is fundamentally different than drafting it. How much do you think you actually can learn from assigning people archetypes or, color combinations about like the viability of those decks in an actual drafted environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would describe it as anecdotal. I think it can give you an idea of some blind spots you have, but you're not going to get the same quality of information from just jamming 100 drafts with your cube, taking it to different people. I think the most valuable information that it gives you is figuring out what your group enjoys doing, even if it's not from I need to support this better or, take a little support out from this archetype. If it's just, hey, I have found that my play group really prefers aggressive builds. Everyone there loves an aggressive build. So for my next cube, I might build something aggressive. I think it helps a little bit more with the personality and interests. And even as I was just jotting down from this exercise, the different varieties of cubes that people showed up. And I made sure to ask, or not cubes, decks. I made sure to ask people in our draft, hey, why did you land on this one today? What brought you here? And a lot of folks just said, hey, there's one really sweet card and I wanted to build around it. And I think it was Derek had Toshiro Umezawa, which is a tough card if you're not getting everything you need to go with it. But when you have everything that needs to go with it, it is absolutely oppressive.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And it was a lot of fun to see that happen. Or Michael talking there and saying, hey, I built a deck that was kind of similar to my favorite version of a deck from the Nutritious Cube. And I can't really draft it if I do the regular cube, but if I have access to all the cards, I can put together this thing. And I just want to see how that goes. Don't know if it's the best or the worst, but I just want to play with it and experience it. And I think it's a lot of fun.
In your experience, have you seen people draft differently after doing this experience? Like, does this shape the future metagame of people playing this cube?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And is that a good thing?
I think it can be, with a big asterisk on that. Like for me, having only done this twice before, my experience was really limited with the cube. And I'm not sure this is going to change much of how I draft. But it is making me aware of some other archetypes, some cards, and a lot of like the texture of what's possible in the cube. I think as you talked about earlier, there's not a lot of big creatures in the cube. As someone who doesn't look at lists before I draft them for the first time, I would have no idea of that. I would just be like, oh, variants. I didn't see any big creatures in my green-red deck. But now I know that since it is a lot lower leaning, I'm going to value cards that interact on that level a little bit higher than I would before. And it's just an interesting educational experience.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. It's not just like, oh, you expect that Red-White Heroic is now going to be the most fought over deck. It's more like you just as a player have learned more about the types of interaction and types of, like what to expect in a game more.
I think specifically talking about Red-White Heroic, and if we look at the 3 different versions of it, it's interesting to think about how many of those cards are also wanted by other decks that are really easy to identify. Right. I think I mentioned that like Blue-Red Spellslinger is a deck that I wanted to build if I had more time. I think there's a compelling argument for a couple different builds of it, but a lot of these cards just fit perfectly into that.
I actually think this will change a little bit how I draft this cube. I think there's this effect where cards look a certain amount of appealing in a pack when you have, you're halfway through pack 1 or the beginning of pack 2, you have some cards already and you're evaluating the pack against the cards you have already. And some cards really don't show how good they are until you're looking at like your entire pool. To me, honestly, I think Reckless Rage is a great example. That's a card I'm already kind of high on here, but building this theory crafted deck and being like, this is literally the best removal spell in the entire cube for me, right? That is maybe not what I anticipated.
For you, meaning in that specific deck?
Yeah, I don't think it's the best removal spell. I mean,
for you, Andy. Could be both. Could be both.
Again, under the right circumstances, I do think it is the best removal spell in the cube. And I actually think those circumstances are not as narrow as maybe I first expected. Like, I think I would take Reckless Rage a little more highly here than I would have if I had not drafted this specific deck. Like, I do think this experience will change how I draft the Red-White Heroic deck in this cube specifically. I don't think it's going to like move my predilections on other decks, but going through the exercise of like theory crafting, what do I actually think the best version of this deck looks like is going to inform how I would draft it if I were sitting down at the table. When I came back for the next week, I did make those tweaks to the Red Heroic deck, but I also just built a deck that I don't think is the best, but is kind of what I wanted to do, and also happens to have a pretty good matchup against the Red Heroic deck, which for me is blue-black ninjas. I say ninjas, plural. You have 3 cards with ninjutsu in the cube. One of them cares about the ninja type line. I did not run any of the changelings. I don't think any of them are appealing enough, but I do think with just Moon Circuit Hacker, Ninja of the Deep Hours, and Ingenious Infiltrator, you can have that be a theme that shows up, in most games you'll draw one of those three, I think, on average. Someone can crunch the numbers on the hypergeometric calculator, but I feel pretty confident that in most games you're going to draw one of those three. Yeah, this is just a full-on tempo deck, and the things to note here were that I spent a lot of time dialing in the right balance of interaction and threats, which I'm not sure I got quite right. I think I might be a little bit threat-heavy and interaction light, and I also spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was the right mixture of removal spells for things on board versus counter spells for things on the stack. I originally started having way more removal spells, and then was like, actually, I think my plan is going to be to get on board early and then hopefully have up counter magic for like their big answer or like way to turn the corner. The things I learned from building this deck were that Brainstorm is broken when you can have as many prismatic vistas as you want.
Yes.
And honestly think it is like a reason to play blue in and of itself, just having Brainstorm. I did some very stupid things with it. Was it against you that I passed on turn 4 or turn 3? I had played Mischievous Mystic on turn 2.
Yes.
And then on turn 3, I did nothing and passed all my lands open. And then you attacked, and I flashed in. What's the
Fairy Vandal?
Fairy Vandal.
Yeah, I'm
Cast
getting
Brainstorm.
flashbacks.
Flashed in Fairy Vandal, cast Brainstorm, and cracked a fetch land.
It's really too bad you didn't first have a Gataxian Probe on your turn to also make another fairy, but that's not in the cube.
Yes, there's just a reason I don't have
yet.
that. I mean, Brainstorm, obviously, with fetches is nuts, and here I ended up playing a full 5 Prismatic Vistas, which I think is on the cusp of too many, but I wanted them because I wanted so badly to be able to shuffle with my Brainstorm. Yeah, I had a lot of fun playing this deck. It was not as good. I think I went 2-1, but they were much closer games that felt like I maybe got a little lucky winning my third game against Derek. And what I'll say about this deck is that compared to the Red White Heroic deck, once I got far, like even moderately behind, I was kind of like, I don't think I'm ever coming back here.
That makes sense. I mean, this is like a tempo deck. You need to get on play with your Fairy Seer into your Ninja, into your things that are going to pay you off for drawing 2 cards a turn. And if you're missing that, I can see how you fall behind. But, I mean, you do have stuff like Baleful Strix. And
yeah, I mean, in theory, it can grind okay. Like, Mischievous Mystic can generate a bunch of creatures. The Baleful Strix, Fibblethip, plus the ninjutsu creatures, or like bounce spells to bounce my own stuff is like a good way to generate some card advantage in a medium-long game. But especially in this format where people are building their ideal decks, like that kind of gameplay doesn't really work. And so I felt like the games where I fell behind, I kind of had a hard time winning. Though I will proudly say that I won a game against Derek where he played 4 removal spells in the first 4 turns of the game. Wow. And I still pulled that one out, which felt pretty good. Because that's kind of the nightmare scenario for this deck. You're like playing a tempo deck and all your threats get answered. This deck is really fun. I love it. It's definitely not as good, but I had a good time playing it. Let's hear about your other decks, and then I have thoughts about a deck I didn't bring. But let's hear about what else you guys designed.
But briefly, I have some more questions about this deck, because it was something else I observed more broadly is I liked the way I saw some people doing splashes, and I feel like this is something that is kind of similar to drafting versus doing this theory craft. That is something I like intentionally curate about this cube, is that there's lots of different ways to splash. And it's like, I brought red-black zombies, somebody else brought mostly mono-black zombies, but here's a little bit of a blue splash for something that makes sense and synergizes. And similar with like the control decks, some of them were Esper, I think there was a Teamer control deck, which is kind of funny. Did you think about splashing white in this deck for things like Reflector Mage, some of those other tempo things, or do you think the mana is just too constrained for that?
It would literally only be Reflector Mage.
Okay.
And yes, Reflector Mage is better than Mana War. It just is.
Yes.
Though it can't bounce your own creatures, which is something.
You're right.
Yeah. There are, I mean, it's not strictly better, but it is better. Like, it's certainly a better card. I just didn't feel like, again, I'm playing 5 Prismatic Vistas here because I want to fetch for my Brainstorm, which means that in order to splash white, I could maybe do it with a single Plains because I do have the 5 Prismatic Vistas, but, I never want to have an opening hand with my Plains in it. Like, I only want it to be in my deck so I can fetch it when I need it. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like the things I would gain from playing another cover just weren't really worth it. It was truly just Reflector Mage. I was like, this is a card that is significantly better than what is in my main deck that I'd be very happy to play, and I just didn't feel like it was doing enough for me.
The other thing that I think is interesting, aside from obviously the Brainstorm situation, this deck does look much more like something that you could draft, because so many of the critical cards that, the Fairy Seer, the like small tempo cards, those are things that you are more likely to get late. And if you can draft early, like a Baleful Strix and a Mischievous Mystic, the ninja stuff especially, like somebody can get in that lane and stake that out, which is kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, this really looked like a realistic 3-0 deck that you could draft.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Red White Heroic deck, I think the iterations we all had, you'd have a hard time putting that together in your normal draft. But this one, was a really cool deck and a lot of fun to play against, and one that I think would be strong and, easy enough to put together.
I think the red-white heroic deck has more redundancy than this deck does, fundamentally.
But do you not think that people are fighting more over a lot of those red cards that are really critical?
Maybe. I think the average card quality in the red-white heroic deck is better, which is what you're responding to. I'm playing Fairy Seer and Ginger Brute here, and
which are cards that just have this incredible ceiling when you can put those other cards around them, but on their own.
Not that incredible of a ceiling. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay, fine.
The incredible
Ginger Brute got lethal on me. So
again, when we say incredible ceiling, we are talking about Illuminated Virtuoso, 2 combat tricks, you're dead. The incredible ceiling of I got to play a Fairy Seer twice. That's not
incredible.
It's not that incredible.
Peak.
Fairy Seer did let me keep 1 land hands on 2 occasions, which I was very grateful for. 2 hands that had Fairy Seer and a Ninja in them. And I was like, yeah, I'm keeping a 1 land hand. I get to scry 2, and
That's cool.
They're both in the draw at least, which really helped. But I get to scry 2 and draw a card, and then also draw another card with this Ninja if I hit the second land. Or I think one case it was the 1 mana, the Moon Circuit Hacker, which I knew I was going to get to draw a card even if I didn't draw a second land. So that's a cool thing about Fairy Seer. Yeah, the average card quality is worse, but first of all, so few 1-drops that are in the cube for this deck. There's one that I'm not playing, which I think is defensible, which is Network Disruptor. But honestly, you need all of those. My ideal version of this deck would not have any of the 3-drop stuff and would just have more 1-drops and more ninjas, but there's only 3 ninjas and there's only 3 defensible 1-drops in my opinion to play in this deck.
You don't want to play Bomat Courier, exile your cards permanently when you bounce it?
The next closest thing to a defensible 1-drop I think is Gravecrawler, just because no one ever wants to block it. And I would not be playing any other zombies. I don't think there's a density of cheap threats that you really want to bounce back to your hand with Ninjutsu, nor a density of ninjas to make this really viable in an average draft. The only time I've drafted this deck was in a Roto draft, and I drafted a very similar list. I had a lot of fun with it and did medium well. I want to say I went 4-3 or something, or 4-2, but it was not the best deck in the Roto draft either. But yeah, it's fun. I like this kind of deck. It's my favorite kind of Magic to play. I thought it was interesting that I decided not to play Skin Render. I thought about it quite a bit, and the double black, despite my access to whatever mana I wanted, was not what I was interested in, because this deck is very, very heavily blue, basically splashing black for ninjas, Baleful Strix, and a couple removal spells. And the other thing is why kill the thing when you can just bounce it with it in this deck? I can just bounce it with Mana War, tap it down with Frost Trickster, tap it down with Pestermite. I'm a tempo deck. All I need to do is get it out of the way for a bit, and I don't need to actually kill it. And these other threats have flying, and they're easier to cast, and they're cheaper, and so I'm just going to go with that. The bounce spells were great in this deck. Bounce spells, I think, are really strong in this cube. That's part of what I think gives this deck a pretty good matchup against Heroic. I didn't get a chance to play that matchup, but the number of bounce spells and 1 mana interaction I have at instant speed in this deck is quite high. And yeah, I just wanted cheap stuff. That was my logic for not playing a Skin Render, even though I was surprised at the end to be I guess I'm not putting Skin Render in this deck, which seems crazy, but I don't think I am.
It'd make that Gravecrawler a little better.
Would.
There's probably a variation of this deck that might be better that plays those
Zombie
2 cards.
Ninjas.
Yeah.
I was going to say, some of those changelings get a little bit more appealing if you're doing Zombie Ninjas.
Yeah, and maybe at that point, too, you're obviously heavier black, so you have a black 1-drop and the double black spell, so maybe your whole distribution of mana changes a little differently, too. What was your second, Dex?
My second deck, I decided to just lean into not what I thought was the best deck, but just what I want to be doing. So I think somebody else had also mentioned, Knight of the Reliquary also is a card that looks pretty good when you get as many Vistas as you want, and as many Ash Barons, or 4. So
would you
I
play
really
more than 4 in any circumstance, you think?
No, I don't think so. So what I ended up doing was, I just tried to build the green-white deck. Many people will know I enjoy green-white. Knight of the Reliquary has also been the cover art card for this cube since it was created. I again feel like I just fell into a lot of traps. I wanted to just be the deck that could go bigger and have better removal against the heroic deck with stuff like Portable Hole and Glass Casket, and then just huge threats like Saddled Rhymestag, which is a card that's one of those cards that surprises new drafters of this cube the most, I think, where it's just oh yeah, this is kind of just Tarmogoyf here.
Stop having a 4/4.
Stop it.
Stop having a 4/4.
But then I also wanted to lean into a little bit of the Landfall stuff with Fearless Fledgling and Undergrowth Champion, which learned a lot about my feelings toward Undergrowth Champion this draft.
Like what?
It's not good.
Yeah, no, it's bad. It's a bad card.
It's so funny how this mythic from World Wake, you compare that to a common from Modern Horizons. It's oh yeah, these are
Glyph Keeper is so much better than Undergrowth Champion. It's not even close.
So much better.
Not even
Heartbreaking,
close.
but accurate, yeah.
Glyph Keeper would probably be just problematic, but maybe I should just try it just to see what happens.
It would be the new, one of the new Hallmark cards.
Yeah.
But I think it would be in keeping with other, it's in the same Dreadhorde Arcanist, Illuminated Virtuoso, Ninja of the Deep Hours tier, I think.
Where I think I got definitely too cute was then also bleeding into some of the heroic
You
themes
always
as well.
get too cute, buddy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just a cute person.
Because I was like, well, I love my Snakeskin Veil and my Tail Swipe and my Blossoming Defense in this kind of deck. So while I'm doing that, let's play the Illuminator Virtuoso, let's play the Fabled Hero, and see if I can also just sort of cheese people out with that. And I think really, honestly, that was probably a better direction to go, and the Landfall stuff was a little bit distracting. Like, Fearless Fledgling is great, but was it worth kind of warping my whole strategy around it? I'm not really sure it was. Yeah, I don't know. So I think I went 1 and 3 with this.
Oh, really?
And it was not good. But I got to put Neither Reliquary in play many times and watch my opponents cast a removal spell.
That card is safe from a lot of removal spells in the cube for having a big toughness.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a fair question. Is I wonder if a lot of this could have just been player error and playing in a way where it's like, I want to be casting my Neither Reliquary when it's coming in as a 5/5, or make sure I'm casting my Fearless Fledgling when I also have a protection spell in hand. I think that I could learn a lot both from building this deck differently and also maybe just playing it more.
Yeah. How do you think it would have fared against the red-white heroic deck?
It didn't fare well.
Did it?
No, did I actually play that matchup? I'm not sure I did. Yeah, it's still just like a little bit too slow, and I probably should have also played more 1-drop creatures.
Okay. The other deck I brought was actually a response to the first deck I ever drafted with your cube. So coming up on, a year now. It was the first night with you all. Regular cube was my first one.
Wow.
I know. Times, how they move on. I drafted what I would describe as what I thought was going to be a zombie deck because I saw some card that said zombie on it. And I'm like, cool, zombies are a supported theme in this cube. And I came to find you had a kind of different take on that in the regular cube, which I have recently grown to really enjoy. Not a big fan.
Now, originally, I hated it because it tricked me.
I thought you were
I
just
was recently come around.
Yeah, not a huge typo fan in cubes. They kind of just feel like you're on wheels the entire time. But I ended up in like a red-black discard with some zombie things. And so I had the question of like, oh, what if I was just all in on zombies? And I ended up building mono black zombies. And my sideboard was exclusively blue cards. And I thought this would just be a fun experiment to try out, where the basic idea is that the main deck had a lot of the ideal black removal spells, and then the sideboard had counter spells if I ran into a matchup where creature removal didn't feel as impactful. Again,
that feeling where you play a mono black deck and then turn 2 they say island go, and you're like, what? Not turn 2, game 2.
Yeah, it's so confusing. I did actually manage to do that sideboard strategy, and it felt pretty good against an Esper, kind of like Blink, White Mane Lion, get your Baleful Strix loop sort of thing. All of my targeted removal felt awful because I was just pointing at something and then that thing, poof, disappeared.
So that's your mistake. Wait till they try to disappear it, then put your removal spell at it.
Yeah, again, probably player error.
No, I'm not suggesting that for real.
But switching into counter spells felt a lot better because I could bait them in situations where he was going to try and do something and I could prevent it and get a larger blowout. But it was fun. It was interesting. The deck ended up being really, really grindy. Very different play pattern than the red-white heroic deck, where a lot of the zombies had the ability to recur. I included some sack effects in there for some card draw as well. Ended up having a lot of fun. Did end up bamboozling myself because I think I went with 6 Prismatic Vistas and then only had 6 fetchables and had already gotten one of the last ones out of there. So that was a heartbreaking moment. But it was interesting seeing the viability of a fully monocolored deck because it does give you the opportunity to have more sideboard cards because you're not spending as much on your mana base.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah, if you're putting in less non-basic lands, you get a bigger sideboard. And so for you, that allowed you to build this sort of like really transformational second strategy. Did you think a lot about your sideboards too, Andy?
I did think a lot about my sideboards. And what people might think is obvious is like, first you build your ideal deck list, and then you're like, all right, well, I've got a few too many cards, and you cut them, and you're like, those cards are not the sideboard cards. Like, the cards that did not make my main deck are not my sideboard cards. My sideboard cards are different cards that I just think are conditionally very strong.
Because you're never swapping into the slightly worse version of a similar effect that you want for your main deck.
Which, honestly, I think a lot of cube designers need to hear that lesson, because I think it's a pretty common, I won't say mistake, but a pretty common pattern in newer cube designs where there's just a bunch of redundancy, and they're like, well, I ran out of the best version of this thing, so I'm playing the second and third best version of it too. And it's like, okay, well, cool card that just is never going to make a main deck because it's not appealing or interesting in any way. And it's just, all right, great. It's my 27th card in every single draft.
Which I think there's also a version of that, like we talked about all the redundancy for the red removal, which has some gradient of quality. And a lot of those cards do still get played because you just don't get your choice of it in an actual draft. So that was a little bit unique to this experience, but I think your point stands.
Again, when you're looking at these deck lists, I was 5 card shorts in all my sideboards. So I could have had deeper sideboards and I guess thought about it a little bit less hard. But I'm proud of the small sideboards I built for both decks, especially the red-white heroic deck. The cards I went with were, I think, in order of value. Claim the Firstborn, which is one of the best cards in the cube in terms of what it can do on the ceiling. You have a red-black sort of sacrifice deck. 1 mana, steal your thing, attack you with it, sacrifice it is crazy rate. And again, in this cube, there's not a lot of stuff over 3 mana value. Like, what is it? 85-90% of the creatures are 3 mana value and under. So
maybe more.
So yeah, it's going to miss some big stuff, obviously, but in the average game, you get to take pretty much whatever you want and sacrifice it, which is huge. I didn't have any sacrifice stuff. I mean, I did have the Reckless Rage. Maybe I could steal it and then deal 2 damage to it or something. But I was just bringing it in out of the sideboard as like, if you're playing creatures that I would rather use myself than kill, which I did get to steal other people's Dreadhorde Arcanists and attack them and flashback my spells, which was pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Claim the Firstborn, huge out of the sideboard. Honestly, maybe should be main deck. That's a meta question.
I think that card is like easy to justify as a main deck because so often it's just like we're kind of racing in this cube. We're both playing pretty aggressive decks, especially in that first day of the new meta of the Theorycraft.
Yeah.
And it's just saying like I'm clearing a blocker and dealing an extra 3 damage to you is kind of nuts.
I for sure main deck it in a draft, and here I was on the fence. Ended up being my first sideboard card,
but yeah, great out of the sideboard for sure.
Fantastic. Direfleet Daredevil was also in my sideboard, which is
Makes sense.
A card that is fantastic on rate in this cube, but obviously not if your opponent doesn't have a target. And from a cube design perspective, I don't love these kinds of cards that don't care about what you did for your deck, only care about how your opponent built their deck. But from a player perspective, great sideboard card I have access to that is sometimes Snapcaster Mage in the right matchup. Lava Coil I had as a removal spell I could side into if I cared about exiling stuff, which also came in quite a bit. Maybe a Lava Coil's better main deck spell here over Volt Charge. I'm on the fence. Volt Charge Proliferate does matter in this deck because I do have +1/+1 counters, so and the fact that it can just go face to close out a game is why I put it in main deck, but I brought in Lava Coil a couple times where it was like, all right, well, you actually have stuff that you can recur out of the graveyard and I want to be exiling. I threw a Nature Stand in there. I was like, I don't know. This is like a classic sideboard card that maybe will matter, and I don't think that it being much in the way of artifacts or enchantments in most people's decks, so never brought that one in.
I don't think you played against the artifact deck, but somebody did have it, and so just like being able to deal with Traxos, which I think your deck would otherwise struggle against.
Stare at.
I will admit my 5th card here was kind of there's not any other hole I can see to patch, and so I did put I did put Feat of Resistance as
build a 44 card pool because that's all you need.
I did include Feat of Resistance as my 5th card in my sideboard, my last sideboard card, which only because I was on the fence about which was better in my deck, Feat of Resistance or Shelter. I do think that's somewhat matchup dependent. I want Shelter when my opponents are either very heavily one color on board so that I can reliably give things unblockable, or they have targeted removal. If they don't have targeted removal, then I'm more happy to have Feat of Resistance, or if they have less targeted removal, because Feat of Resistance allows you to just give a buff to a creature, which Shelter you don't feel good about using unless you are really getting a card. Ideally, you want to fizzle something. Just cantripping and triggering Heroic is not really worth 2 mana. So Feat of Resistance giving the additional counter. And I do have, Swiftblade Vindicators and Illuminated Virtuosos in my deck. So I was on the fence about which one was better, and I never ended up bringing it in because Shelter felt really good. Shelter's strong. So that was my sideboard. And I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun thinking about the sideboards in these decks. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, real quick.
Please.
My other point of putting Feat of Resistance in there was that there were some matchups where I wanted both. I wanted an additional protection spell.
Sure.
Like against the control decks, I wanted to have Emerge Unscathed, Shelter, and Feat of Resistance, because against a really heavy control deck, what I'm trying to do is basically have one explosive turn where I just kill you and have 2 protection spells to protect something. So that was the other reason, is it wasn't just I can't decide which one's better or worse. It's that sometimes I want another one instead of a removal spell. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's so interesting too, because again, having the same deck but really different lanes of attack. I had all of those cards in my main deck, and my sideboard for this were just burn spells, where my first matchup was I'm going to be all in on the combo, and then if I feel like they're going to disrupt it and I need to go a little bit slower or longer, I'm going to put in some more cards that give me some reach, some more interaction. But yeah, sideboarding was challenging for me, partially because I'm less familiar with the list. I also think partially because your cube doesn't have a lot of really intentional sideboard cards, which I love. I think that's good. I think cube should not just be full of 40 additional cards that are for really specific matchups, but there wasn't any clear Tormod script. This card is just put in here to stop something from happening. So I think that gave you some creative freedom on how you wanted to approach your sideboard and what you really wanted to prioritize with your main deck. But that part was fun.
In my first deck, I thought about, I was thinking about the white splash for some of those critical sort of deal you slow damage with creatures cards. Another consideration there was, do I also want to be able to side into a control deck? So I put 2 Wraths in the sideboard. And you can always get more basics, so with a bunch of Vistas, I could also pretty easily skew my mana base to be able to support that. Obviously, I had other issues with my mana base, but I think that theoretically, like, I think that kind of stands, and is kind of an interesting aspect of having all the Vistas, is that you can do something kind of transformational. Also, yeah, I mean, sort of like you mentioned, Andy, just having very different effects than I want main deck. So Drown in Sorrow, so a -2 to all creatures, is going to be a great sideboard card against a couple different decks, and also something that just, maybe you're just on the draw and you just want that in your opening hand, is going to be pretty powerful. Also effects like Blood for Bones that are going to help me regrow and like get more value against a control deck that has a lot of removal. In my second deck, it was more about just having like different types of removal. So, you know, maybe main deck I'm playing the Portable Hole, maybe I need to upgrade that into something that can deal with a large creature instead. So yeah, I think that there's those 2 areas of like patching a really specific matchup dependent effect that you need, or yeah, I'm sure I had Nature's Chant in there as well. And then also just having the flexibility to change like the type of interaction that you have, I think is a good way to use those sideboard spots.
Did this experience recontextualize any specific cards for you in the cube? You talked about the one that I was going to bring up, which was Claim the Firstborn, a card that I never draft, never play. And in this environment, I'm like, oh, that, like, it absolutely lost me several games because someone just took away my thing, killed me with it, and it felt awesome. It felt great. But that is a card that if I draft this again, I will now be aware of. Yeah,
it's amazing how much the rate reduction, because I think Threaten is pound for pound not a great Magic card. That's because it's so conditional. Like, stealing your opponent's creature, they have to have something good enough that's worth stealing. It's so temporary. It's card negative on average. Like, you have to be able to sacrifice the creature or do something. Otherwise, after the turn is over, you're just down a card from your like 1 threaten effect. Making it 1 mana, I think, changes everything. Obviously, it makes the card more powerful as a baseline, but more importantly, like, I'm so happy to use Acclaim the Firstborn essentially just as like a lava axe, you know? Like,
right, yeah.
Like, I'm not so like Threaten, I'm not 3 mana to just deal like a few extra damage to your face is like not a good rate in the average environment, but Claim the Firstborn, if I play a couple of attackers on turn 1 and 2, and then you play your first blocker on turn 3, I might just be like, you know what? I can claim the Firstborn and play a 2-drop here and use all my mana and like also deal a bunch of damage to you and like put you on the back foot. I'm just going to do that, which Threaten doesn't really have the option to do that because it hits everything and also costs more mana. And I think both cards are probably balanced. Like, I'm not saying Threaten should cost 2 or whatever. I'm just saying that restricting the size of the thing you can take and making it cheaper just is transformational to what the card actually does and how it plays. Mm-hmm. I didn't think that hard about my sideboard for my blue-black deck, to be perfectly honest. This deck was just like, I'm putting all the cards I love in here. I'm not going to think that hard about it. I was excited to get Witch's Vengeance out of a sideboard, which is a strong card that cares about creature types and, you know, could be a one-sided Wrath. It's a very sideboardable card. I think sideboards are a more unexplored space in cube design than a lot of other arenas. Like, I love sideboarding. I think it's really cool, and I find in a lot of cubes I just don't have sideboard options. My sideboard options just end up being the worst cards that already do the same things my other cards do.
Or just like, here's this totally off-color pick that I just, like, there's nothing in the pack. And so realistically, my sideboard in a lot of cube draft is like 3 cards.
I don't mind a 3-card sideboard, but I want it to be 3 cards that, like, I'm like, yeah, I'm really excited to bring this in sometimes. And so that's something I've been striving to do in my own cube design projects, is like make sideboard picks interesting and add some depth to like what sideboards are capable of. My last thought about this experience was that there was a deck I thought would be very strong that I did not build, and it's basically the control deck. It's an Esper control deck. I would have gone about it much differently than Max did. I didn't see his full list, but I saw over the shoulder of like some games happening, and I saw he had like, you know, a tribute mage to go get Maze Mind Tome and like some other sort of like value things, which, to be honest, Max's deck probably better just because he's really good at building that kind of deck, but that's not how I would have gone about it.
To be fair to the tribute mage, it was also getting either Baleful Strix or a Glass Casket, so it had a lot of flexibility there.
I'm not saying it was a bad inclusion. I'm just saying that that's not how I would have thought about building the control deck. That's not how my brain works. So I probably wouldn't have arrived at that conclusion.
You don't think about, I search up this, and then this gets this, and then this gets this.
That's what Max loves to do.
Mode.
Into the Mind Palace.
Going Max mode, yeah. You know, I said I think the red-white aggro deck or the red-white heroic deck is like some version of like the best deck in this cube, but I kind of stand by that, but I do think that a capable pilot, like, you know, just imagine if we had like transported Zach Barish to this theory draft, like he would have drafted a control deck and no one would have been able to beat him, I'm certain. I do think a control deck, you can build a very good control deck here, and to be perfectly frank, I just didn't want to spend the time to think about building it properly and then play probably 5 or 6, because we didn't have to do a draft, we just sat down and started playing, and I was just like, I'm not sure I have the brain for like 5 control matchups in an evening, and I'd rather just like see how broken I can make this proactive strategy. So I want to acknowledge that, like, I look at cards like, I think By Invitation Only is the best card in the cube that I did not put in either of these decks. Card is cracked, utterly busted. And if I was playing another deck, would have been playing that. And if I didn't build a deck I just wanted to play in week 2 and I built the next best deck, it would have been probably an Esper control deck of some variety. I'll say that I think the thing that's interesting about those decks in this environment is that you don't have a lot of the like hallmark control finishers, nor some of the like hallmark big card advantage spells. Like,
what are you talking about? We have Tribute Mage, the hallmark control finisher.
That's why I'm saying I think it's a very good chance that Max just built a better version of the deck than I would have come up with, because that sort of thing is probably how you generate card advantage. You're not just like, I'm going to end step Factor Fiction and draw a bunch of cards after I help counter spells. That's not what you do in this environment.
It's much more to the board. And yeah, I mean, just to mention another card that people would otherwise message us about, Ephemerate is kind of a busted card here if you can build around it. And I like seeing Reflector Mage into Ephemerate, and especially how did somebody do this? What am I thinking of? I guess just, being able to... Was it a Shelldock Isle? I don't know. I saw some rude stuff happening with Ephemerate and Reflector Mage, and I think that was a really key way for the control deck to just kind of clown on the red-white heroic decks.
Ephemerate is a really good shout-out, actually. That is a card that is similar to Reckless Rage in terms of like its ceiling and what it's capable of. Yeah, I think it's a great example. Good shout-out. I don't know why I hesitated at first. At first I was like, well, there's not like really broken stuff you can like cheat in, but here it's just broken to get
Evoke a Muldrifter?
Yeah,
classic.
Exactly. Yeah, basically.
The thing people like to do with Ephemerate.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
I feel like another sort of way to tackle this experience is like, what would you change as a cube designer? And honestly, I don't feel like I want to change a ton of things. Like, I think that there was...
It'd be crazy to me if you wanted to change the cube.
Yeah.
After anything anybody said or did in the whole world.
But I think there are like a couple interesting things that are worth considering. Like your mention of there's not as many blue 1-drops that you want for the Ninjas deck. There is a Terramander, and that's like a card that is support for the Spells deck, which is also a deck that nobody built. I'm curious about why that happened, but I think the red-blue Spells deck can be very powerful here.
I agree.
Derek kind of did. Derek had like a Grixis spells
spell and sack.
Yeah, it was kind of dipping its toes into the best parts of a lot of synergies, but he had Young Pyromancer, Gutter Snipe, and like tons of cantrips, and so...
And then Natalie actually also put one together. And I think like that's a slot where I could pretty easily just shift that into something that works better in the Ninjas deck and is taking away support from a deck that I think is already pretty strong. The Undergrowth Champion that I mentioned, I'm just like, Landfall has just always been a little bit of a heartbreaker here because the cards that exist with Landfall are just such like huge disparity in terms of power level. It's really hard to get them to like make sense together in one environment. But this really demonstrated to me that card is not worth it. And maybe that whole like theme is worth a little bit of interrogation.
Just bring back Rampaging Balefs.
Yeah.
Oof.
I genuinely think the cube is so different from the literal first draft where Rampaging Balefs was a problem.
Just rampage on everybody's face. Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, maybe that's better than Earl of Squirrel.
It's certainly better than Earl of Squirrel. There's no question about it.
It's 4/4 squirrels.
Oh my gosh.
Adam, thanks for suggesting this for the play group. I think it was a really fun exercise. I love doing all these kind of like weird little experiments, which, I love a different way to think about cubes and cube design, and this is a great example of something that if you've got a more invested play group, it's willing to print out some proxies and sleeve them up over basic lands or whatever, and do this exercise. I think it leads to some interesting conversation and some interesting decks.
Yeah.
It's also nice just on a logistical note that, yes, proxying up your deck is a little bit of work, but beyond that, there's so much flexibility of just like, as many people as want to do it, just show up, you play 2 games, play 6 games, doesn't matter.
I'm just laughing at you discovering the convenience of anything other than cube. You just show up and just play your deck against another player.
But why would you do that?
Anything other than the slight inconvenience of getting everyone at the same place at the start of the draft night and making sure no one leaves, early or whatever. There are advantages to constructed Magic, it turns out.
You have to find people that play the same format that isn't Commander.
Well, that's why you have Cube Constructed or Theory Drafting, whatever you want to call it. Do you want to plug anything, Adam? I didn't even mention that you're a writer for Cool Stuff Inc., that you're out there producing Cube content. I didn't even mention that.
No, not particularly. I mean, I write for Cool Stuff Inc. I love writing about Cube. I love talking about Cube. If I was going to plug anything, it would be to tell people to be good to one another. Just be nice, whether it's in the Cube community or out in the world. Just, try and do something nice for someone every day, whether it's a friend or a stranger. Just try and make the world a little bit better. And I think I found a lot of that mentality in this Cube group, which has been lovely and wonderful, and why I think I jumped in so hard and fast with all our local gang. But yeah, just be good to each other. Be patient, be kind, be understanding, and try and give folks the benefit of the doubt.
It's a lovely sentiment that I will also counteract with be mean to some people.
Yeah.
There's
they
some
deserve
people,
it. Yeah.
There are some people should be really mean to.
Maybe you should be just really medium to some people. Just be normal.
We are the
classic
three angels and devils on your shoulder.
It's the angel, the devil, and then Anthony sitting on top of your head going like, just
Whatever
be
you
normal,
want,
just be a guy.
Have you thought about eating a pickle today?
Yeah.
That could be nice. That could be a nice normal activity.
The angel, the devil, and the pickle on your shoulder. Eat me! Eat me every day! And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty. The show is edited by Matthew. All the magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. And this podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and speaking to microphones about it. Anthony and Adam, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for always being kind. Thank you for the mushroom book.
Thanks for having me.
Did I already make a Too Many Bones, Not Enough Blood intro for the podcast?
I don't think so.
There's like a 30% chance I already made the exact intro I'm planning on making for this episode.
Okay.
And if I did, guess what? You're going to get 2 versions of it.
Oh, you know what? I think you might have.
I think I might have, but it would have been...
Do you not have a spreadsheet?
No, I thought I did, but I'm just thinking of the spreadsheet that Bones made that is all of your nicknames for all of the
It
episodes.
wasn't Bones. It was Talo.
Talo and Donald K. Magic helped us with all of the notes, but I thought the spreadsheet was Bones.
Don't think so. Maybe there are multiple spreadsheets. I don't know.
There could be multiple competing spreadsheets, but I don't think there's actually one chronicling all the intros. I'm 90, well, not 90. I'm going to say, as we're talking about it more, I'm getting more and more confident that I already made the... What set was that? Did that come out in a set that we covered the release of?
M11?
Oh, definitely not that.
No, that's not right. Blood for
Was it
Rose.
M19?
2020. Core set 2020.
That was like our first
Why
episode.
did I say M11? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Our very first episode, I think, or our second episode. First episode was a Core Set 2020 review. I definitely did not make a Too Much Blood, Not Enough Bones intro for that. I don't think Adam even knows what I'm talking about.
I don't, but I'm happy to be in the room while it's happening.
I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it again, maybe. I don't know. We're going to find out.